Morning.
Good morning.
How you
How
doing?
you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right.
Good. I'm sort of back in operation. Hey, Mark.
That's good.
Yeah, I can sip coffee without it dribbling out of my mouth. So that's good.
That's a feature.
Yeah, I can kind of smile. Yeah, it was a shock. Kind of a
Hmm.
tame family dog. Young, he's less than 2 years old. So I guess anything
Hmm.
can happen.
Yeah.
And I think he saw his reflection in my glasses and he doesn't like
Uh,
them. So I think that was the name of the game there. Yeah, so he got me up here and he got me right here and tore a chunk out of my lip. And so I got it stitched together. I saw a trauma facial trauma surgeon
hmm.
yesterday-ish and or maybe the day before. And he said, "Yeah, it looks like it'll heal okay and we can look at it after it's healed and decide whether we need to do anything to it." But
Hmm.
I don't mind having a little scar and as long as my mouth operates. I would like to be able to whistle again. I'm sort of proud of my skills whistling, so I'd hate to lose that. But yeah, I've got 4 stitches in there. They're coming out on Tuesday, and
Hmm.
and then I'll be off to California on Wednesday after my class for Thanksgiving with my parents and my sister. So
Cool.
yeah, so all's well that ends well, I guess.
That's a Davis area?
Yes, they're in Woodland. My sister's in
Okay.
Sacramento. My parents are in Woodland, and she
Cool.
hosts the Thanksgiving thing. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So yeah, so that was my little adventure, and it was kind of funny because facial wounds bleed a lot, so I had a towel, kind of jammed up against my face, and my ex said, "Well, I'll take you to the ER, that needs to get looked at," and I said, "Okay, but hey, Chris, but before we go, I need to send a message out that I won't be at the thing." So I went into my office and I was like typing with my left hand. So I was yeah. So it was a surprise.
It's a new one for my dog ate my homework excuse file.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, my dog ate my upper lip. Yeah. Yeah, and the doc actually the facial trauma guy said, "So did he really tear a chunk out or did it just, spread out after it was split and stuff?" I was like, hell if I
Hmm.
know. But
You're the doctor.
right, exactly. Yeah. But while he was looking at it, all stitched together and stuff, and so it was kind of funny because he was the guy who told the ER doc how to do it. And she was very doubtful that it was going to be, anything but a kind of a stopgap. And then
Hmm.
after she did it, she said, "Hey, that doesn't look so bad." And she was sort of pleasantly surprised, and I'm kind of impressed with the work that she had done. And he seemed to think that it would heal up okay. So yeah. So I may have a tiny little scar above the kind of the red part of my lip, but I don't care about that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're finishing this book, which is a relief for me.
I kind of like reading these short essays because it seems like they go by maybe a little quicker, but I
Yeah.
also feel like some of them didn't build on each other as much as I would have hoped a well-edited,
Yeah.
scholarly set of things would go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like I said, I was really surprised that this wasn't a set of conference papers because that was kind of the way I thought it sort of read. It was just,
Hmm.
it wasn't that tightly edited or maybe people were just given, too much too broad of a brief, in terms
yeah.
of the thing that they were asked to do for this. I mean, it does seem like a kind of uh, like that what they've compiled is sort of the things that these people do and are known for. But aside from that, aside from kind of putting their flag in the ground on their little spot of the turf,
Well, it kind of reminded me a little bit too, and some of them were. or a good number of them, and I'll have to like put together a list of which ones kind of had this pattern. But a lot of them were, and they were good, interesting overviews, a lot of them that, gave some history or terminology that I either hadn't heard or didn't know about, but knew about the thing itself
Yeah,
as a thing.
right.
But a lot of them were very small, tiny movements where like 1 or 2% of things were covered by this topic.
Yeah.
Like the majority of society is doing something else, but like 1 to 5% are doing this thing. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting and it seems to work for those people. And it could potentially be a model for working for others. But I was struck especially because, as we do in the house, during times of trouble, West Wing is on, infinite loop.
Mhm.
And this week was, Josh hitting the Prius with his big SUV. So he invites all the small players in the energy space that cover 1 or 2% of energy production to the White House for a discussion of what should we be doing.
Mhm.
And it was like, oh, this is the book I'm reading.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
that's the thing. I mean, a different way to look at it would be, who do they think was going to read it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that wasn't part of the plan. It's like, okay, you know, is there a collective that would
Or,
find
Yeah.
this
or the missing
collection interesting?
Yeah.
the missing chapter was the one on the sociologist who has the ability to take the politics and the policy and put it together to say, here's how we effectuate all of it.
Mhm.
Rather than here's a good idea, here's an interesting idea. There was no, okay, now how do we take all these things and slowly drag them into the forefront, which, is the thing we need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. With
Yeah.
econ, a lot of it is you're working in small pieces. So you're looking at communities, you're looking at it at sort of smaller scale, not the global, because there is no universals,
Mhm.
and universals are impossible. So you're having to work at smaller scales and being able to figure out what in the collection is there. I
Yeah.
don't know that this book covered what's needed to be able to get there.
Mhm.
But it's just it I really like Mark's question of who did they think would be reading this, because it's not something you would hand to undergrads, and it's sort of at that level because there's just there is a lack of cohesion, but there's also like relatively short essays that are covering giant swaths of subjects,
Mhm.
and that there are books and books on. And it's just like, I'm like, okay, we're leaving out 80% of this, and we're going to talk about this tiny piece.
Mhm.
And just like that sort of third economy
Yeah.
of like nonprofits, trade associations, councils, all sorts of other stuff. And they focused on two
Mhm.
and just sort of, and didn't even get into the funding and the reasons why. Is it sort of lobbying? Is it, like unions support are external to corporations, they're not governmental,
Mhm.
and they sort of take on sort of the HR aspects that companies could and often do.
Mhm.
But a lot of that is just sort of exported and you pay your dues to another organization
Right.
that's separate from where you work,
Yeah.
that supposedly looks out for you. And so and that sort of falls into that space. And there's just tons of things that fall into that space.
Mhm.
And it is just incredibly broad and diverse and
And
deep.
yeah, and too general, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been, you know, I could have been convinced to be curious about, sort of how public sector unions differ from, kind of industrial unions differ, and how they've changed over time, from the era
Yeah.
of, Homestead and the old, the old big strikes in the first Gilded Age, to today and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, similarly, the thing, the essay that, if I was going to wish an essay into this, it might have been, and I might have, I might have wished that Graeber would have talked more about the different economies at different scales thing,
Yeah.
right? Communism in your home, and then socialism, and then
Huh.
and then all of that. Because I think that that scale question was more interesting,
Yep.
in this context maybe than what he actually did.
Yeah.
And in the in the context of NGOs and third economy kind of organizations,
Yeah.
are they more or less successful at a local level than they are at an international kind of level?
Yeah.
I also was hit this week by our new friend and philosopher Jimmy Carr.
Mm.
I saw I don't think it was me watching it. I think it actually was my wife. There was a reel, and it was a little to like 2 minute snippet. Some woman in the audience yells out, "What do you think of communism?"
Mm-hmm.
And his response literally was almost exactly what you
It
just
was
said.
so Graberish. Yes, I saw that one. Yeah.
He's like, "It's in your home and with your kids and your family, you are a total communist."
Mm-hmm.
And as the further out you go, the worse we become as humans.
Yeah.
And screw the other guy.
Yep. Yeah, I thought that was
It's like,
I thought that was kind of an interesting one. Yeah, I thought that was like, oh, he's and he oftentimes does sort of drop little hints about the places that he's gotten some of his kind of stoic philosophy from. Apparently, his background is that he was a poor kid, Irish, son of Irish immigrants, but got a full ride to, I think it was Cambridge.
Wow.
And so had a really posh education, and then went to work for a global oil company, I think, in marketing. He's had a weird kind of a weird run. I wanted to go on a tangent here and show you this, and note the
I can't read who's the author's
Yeah.
Mortimer Adler.
just Mortimer Adler. This is
is that the
This is
1940?
the 1940 edition. I just got a copy, and it is way different.
Huh.
I've only read about the first 20 pages so far, but way different.
Yeah, I don't, if I remember, I kind of skimmed a digital copy, and as I recall, the like latter two sections, including some topical reading, is not even a thing that's on there.
Except that apparently, I mean, I've just read I've looked at the table of contents and stuff and flipped through it, and he does spend a lot of time in the second half, kind of making his pitch for the great books. So, so this was sort of at the beginning of his, the part that I'm in, he's still, sort of doing a little autobiographical thing and talking about how he learned that he didn't know how to read when he did the general honors course at Columbia. And he co-taught it with Mark Van Doren, who he was very impressed with, and sort of very intimidated, I guess maybe it would be the right word, by his sort of level of interaction with the actual texts in a way that Adler admitted that he had not been doing. He had been going to secondary sources and finding out what people had said about the thing in about the text, and had been sort of passing that off as kind of original work, which I thought was interesting because I had just been kind of writing about that and talking about that when I was updating my most recent chapter in the revised handbook about sort of the whole idea of tertiary sources being not really valuable for actually what I said was you need to know this stuff in order to begin going on to secondary sources and primary sources and putting together your own thoughts about stuff. As I'm trying to give advice to, I was thinking mostly of my students in that instance, but the idea that that we used to, what I was and the other thing I was trying to do, I guess, which will be relevant to next week, when we started talking about AI was to try to historicize AI use as something that is not that different from, Google/Wikipedia, 10 years ago, or going to the shelf and grabbing the encyclopedia, a generation ago. But we wouldn't pass off, or we wouldn't try to pass off, or if we tried, we wouldn't get away with passing off what we read in the encyclopedia for our own work. And so the idea that, that we're going to try that now is
Yeah.
is embedded in that, in that history, I think, a little bit too.
Well, also, it reminds me a little of the common question that pops up in, I don't read them as frequently as I used to, and the the velocity of engagement is significantly slowed down, but every now and then somebody will pop into like the Reddit Zettelkasten group and say, how do I use this for learning? And the thing usually is when you're in kind of learning mode, this type of note taking is not super great. You're better off like you're doing the, Adler would call it the overview read, or the
Inspectional.
the inspectional read. And then it's when you're done, you go back and you take out maybe the four things that are really the primary
Mhm.
ideas. And that's what you want from the thing. It's not when you come into a new subject, it's all new, and you could have take notes on everything,
Right.
but how really valuable, you learn 2 plus 2 in the beginning of math, and then at the end of the math course, you know the general method of how do you get to 2 plus 2. So your note on 2 plus 2 means nothing.
Mhm.
It's the method and the process that's more important than the
Right.
actual thing.
Right. Unless you're diagramming the actual structure of the argument or something like that.
And usually, as a result, when you read the encyclopedia overview, that's all you're getting is the quick overview, not the nitty gritty.
Mhm.
And the point of reading to write for you is, how do we get into the super nitty gritty and extract something useful out of it? How do we abstract that? Yes, we can learn about 2 plus 2, but how do we abstract out the broader how addition works, or
Mhm.
how division works,
Right.
and do that?
Right.
Um,
Well, and also I think the other element to that is the stuff that's in the encyclopedia, or the stuff that, the language model has scraped off of the internet, is generally the least controversial, the most agreed upon, the most common knowledge stuff, right? That's why that, aside from, the occasional, um, sort of Encyclopedia Britannica, article written by a celebrity, nobody signs an encyclopedia entry that they write, right? Because it's all assumed to kind of be common knowledge. And so it's after that, it's after you've kind of gotten the handle on that, and you go to the next thing, where, where you will actually maybe find some things that are not, 100% nailed down, right? And that are not, completely agreed upon, where you can actually engage in, in some type of a ongoing kind of debate about things, and that, and I that's the part I like. That's where I think it kind of gets interesting.
in fact, when I go through, and you probably go find hundreds of them, even in my digital notes, when I see those things, I actually put a tag on them, open questions,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's easier when I come back and I be like, okay, where are the interesting things in this area? So I can search for some keyword in the tag open questions,
Right.
and see all the really great, like, okay, here's where I could take an entry point,
Mm-hmm.
and then collect things around that
Right.
to come up with an answer to those open questions, or
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
where are the squidgy things? And I don't think students really are taught, and you eventually come out of it through experience. This is how you do this.
Mm-hmm.
But students generally aren't taught to, in their gut, put those kind of hashtags in the margins of like, here's the unanswered thing, and how do I go about or they haven't been kind of taking notes and collecting them and organizing them in such a way that when they do find that open question, you can go search around those areas to then do that kind of syntopical search and compile all the pieces to try and come up with that answer or to start reading actively towards that answer.
I just wrote that down. I think that is worth kind of elaborating on, right? That whole idea that, that in something like the thing that I'm working on, I should actually say that explicitly and say that you're going to pass if you write a common knowledge, kind of a short-term paper, but you're going to do well if you engage with it, in that sense. So yeah, so maybe that is something that, yeah, I'll take some time and try to encourage people to.
It's one of those things that I think, I want to say it was Keith Thomas wrote like a 4 or 5 page paper. I'll dig it up and link it in a minute. But he's a historian who's been working for decades, and he says I've been collecting these notes, and I think he kept his in envelopes and would shove them and collect them over time. But he was like, as a historian, I may be interested in something like comedy over time.
Mm-hmm.
And over a 30-year career, I'll have collected a bunch of notes from random readings on comedy over centuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that gives me the ability to kind of delve into that topic in a way you'd never be able to do it, because all the little things you collected were things that probably wouldn't even be indexed by a good book indexer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a passing mention.
Right.
But you'll be able to find the super duper specific things you need, and then to compile them at the end of a career, come up with that thing, is a useful thing. But the problem is you can't know you want that, or if you decide you want that, as a student, it's way, way, way harder to come up with all the tiny little things that you would have collected over the span of 30 or 40 years.
Right.
But how much of it is who gets to ask the questions and your perception of that? So if you're a student, you don't get to ask the questions. You're more worried about the questions that are going to be asked of you.
And getting the right answer. Yeah.
And what's the right answer?
Yeah.
So the student is quite capable. I mean, I don't know. I think at some level the student is quite capable of pursuing their own interests, which is where you would run into that kind of thing. But it's
unless you're
not that much part of the academic system until you get fairly advanced and someone all at once asks you, well, what's your problem? What are you interested in investigating? And it's like, now what?
No one's ever asked me before. Yeah.
And the essay writing, so up through my first 2 years of college, most of my education was like answering questions, short essay, other things. And then when I got to St. Mary's College, the teaching method shifted to the professors were guiding students, discussing and teaching themselves for the most part. And I didn't have any multiple choice questions after that or short essay. It was pretty much all essay, even in class tests. And in that, if you give the default answer, you're a C or a B. But if you start tearing things apart and questioning, that's where things move forward.
Right.
And that worked really well for how I think about things and just continually questioning things and curious about things. And it's like, this laid out all these things, but what about this? Here's where the gaps were. Here's what I wasn't there. And I can't remember if it was before or after reading the How to Read a Book, or just sort of had gutted it. But essentially the topic of just sort of arguing with a book as you're reading it. And it's like, this isn't proving enough to me. This has gaps. What about this? rather than just sort of taking everything in and just sort of everything that is written, taking it at face value. And,
Yeah.
this is sort of the truth.
Mhm.
And where I've had essays that I've done, actually had one essay at my community college. It was my last one that I did. And it was to read a book. It was for American history, Civil War to current. And I picked up Catcher in the Rye because I hadn't read it and had wanted to read it.
Mhm.
And my essay sort of flipped it as from being a history book to being this is where things are going.
Mm.
This is the shape of what the 60s are going to be in the counterculture movement. This
Oh,
is
wow. Interesting.
and,
Yeah.
and the professor was just like, I know this is your last class, but please work with me over summer because I want to submit this to a journal.
Nice.
And I was like, I had no idea what that meant. And
Mm.
I'm like, extra work over summer? I'm done. I'm going, it sort of skipped it.
Mm.
But it was just sort of that not taking things, essentially just sort of not really following directions
Mhm.
and just sort of taking something and flipping it. And I got really curious I'm like seeing all these things. I'm like, wait, this is before all of this happened. And here's, Holden Caulfield taking these perceptions in sort of this counterculture sort of way, but it was before all of that happened. And I'm like, did this set the foundation for that
Mhm.
in some degree? And then my last semester of undergrad took in England, and one of the last tests that I had for a formal logic class, we had 4 words and we had to, apply Aristotelian logic to them.
Mm.
Um, and I chose defense, and I said defense is not a term when you're thinking of like military defense. It is not, it's the wrong word. It means nothing because nobody is scared of defense. People will attack you no matter how good your defense is. What they're worried about is if you can, come back and attack them and wipe them out.
Right.
So defense is just sort of a word that doesn't really exist. It means absolutely nothing. And I had that same discussion after that essay. They're like, this was really good. We'd like to have you continue on. We know you're done with undergrad. Would you like to continue as a master's and, come to Oxford and, pick something to do here?
Wow.
Didn't fully grasp the whole hold
The
of what that
magnitude
meant.
of the offer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't have like my mentors that had sort of helped sort of frame everything and didn't reach out to them.
Mhm.
And so I was just like, no, I want to go off to, I'm headed off to France for a month, hang out in Lyon with my girlfriend and go to Corsica camping and like,
Mhm. Which also didn't suck.
So
Probably.
how's it going now, Dr. Vanderwall?
it, it just, I didn't figure that something that I could just come up with off the cuff would be that relevant or
That's
have,
significant. Yeah. Yeah.
have a sort of sliding door moment.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. We do.
Well,
Yeah, there are kind of those turning point
Yeah.
moments. Yeah. Yeah. It fascinates me that whole idea, going back to what Chris was saying too about, about
Yeah.
tagging things or putting
Mhm.
some type of a keyword on something
Yep.
that would allow you to to kind of go back to it or accumulate things over time or see how I was trying to find it this morning. I wasn't able to find it. My dad and I have been emailing back and forth. He sends me his journal entries that he writes most days, and in one of them he had been talking about Virginia Woolf, and he had quoted something which seemed to me as if she was saying, and I asked him, and he said, and then we kind of had a conversation about it because I don't think that that's maybe what she really meant, but it sort of, the bell that it rang for me was what, looking at your own life changes in the context of your reaction to great literature, great books, right? And that was the impression I got from whatever the quote was, that that she had seen something change about her own response to something that she had read, with a big gap of years between, the first reading and and the most recent reading, and was able to understand something about her own kind of mental makeup based on, the different response that she had to the thing, as an adult or whatever, or as a wiser adult with more experience or whatever. That so that's been kind of on my mind, sort of in the background of thinking about, well, actually of thinking about, what I want to do in my retirement too.
Yeah. Well, here's your example too of where Adler goes from book one to the revision in 1972. And here's a guy who literally wrote the book on how to read in 1940.
Mhm.
And then he runs into the Van Dorn family, and it's literally turns the world, because I think the difference between the two books is incredibly huge.
Yeah.
And the first book that he wrote, I think, is something, if you're a good high school student, or certainly at least a curious college student, you could probably sit down and write what he wrote in 1940 in a different way, in a different style, but
Mhm.
the mechanics of here's how you read a thing,
Mhm.
I think most people could do that. And so the beginning of that book is very dull, and it's not as exciting because you're reading things you know already.
Yeah.
Or when you read it, you're like, yeah, there's nothing really new or exciting in this. It's
Mhm.
like usually when I read management theory books,
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, this all makes sense.
Right. You're only
There's
calling it new to
nothing,
position it. Yeah.
the you throw the Japanese word kaizen on it, and suddenly, okay, here's a new theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it makes sense. Like, this is everyday experience. This is nothing new.
Yeah, well, and I was kind of getting I mean, he was so far, again, I've only read about 20 pages or so, and it's still in the kind of the autobiographical part, but he's been really kind of leaning heavily into the idea that you may think you know how to read, but you don't. And
Yeah.
and the example that he's trying to give is, I thought I knew how to read, but I didn't. And not I'm not 100% buying it. I'm sort of like, okay, I'll do the suspension of disbelief thing, but
Well, but then when he gets to the second one in 1972, those are different ways of reading that most people don't actually do.
yeah.
And that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. But
Mhm.
it's also very hard to describe what that kind of enlightening feeling is until you've read that way on several topics and come up with examples of here's what it looks like and this is why.
Yeah.
I think some of the better his his mid 70s KCET documentary
Mhm.
where he and Van Doren, I think it's a series of like
Hmm.
10 TV shows for half an hour each,
Right.
where they talk about what they did in the revision of the book,
Mhm.
but they're talking about it, and in the talking about it conversationally, and some of the conversations a little stilted, and we know where we're going, so let's come up with a topic that gets us there,
Mhm.
is a little stilted. But in the description of the how we're reading it and what the goal is when we're done, and some of that didn't even exist in the book,
Yeah.
but I thought was really insightful.
Mhm.
But it's small, simple stuff that you don't realize it's valuable until you attempt to put it into practice. So you see it and you're like, oh yeah, it's you,
If
you
you
don't
if
you
you
don't
help
realize
her,
the value of the working method until it's too late. Or as a student,
Yeah.
you watch your professor and what they're trying to teach you and lead you through, and you may not get the subtlety of the value of the thing until way later.
Mhm.
So or even things like, playing around in the indie web community where I have watched for almost a decade now, computer scientists, some of them at the very highest level, and people who, in some sense, have invented and are still evolving the web, watching them work and the questions they ask. And they're very intentional about, hey, you have a new problem, so go look out and see how others have solved that problem
Mhm.
before you even jump in,
Mhm.
and having seen how that works and evolves and how they come to the answers they come to, has been way more valuable for me. But then I watch people, let's say in the note-taking space, somebody's like, "Oh, I have this problem of how to take better notes, so I'm going to write my own program. Obsidian doesn't work for me.
Right, right.
Notion doesn't work for me. I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to make yet another note-taking application because, hey, that seems to be where everybody's going lately.
Hmm.
I want to do it, and here's I know, but I want feedback from you. And it's patently obvious to me they've missed that first step of looking at all the examples of how have people done this before,
Right.
so I can not only do this for myself but do it better and do things. And I'm struck too by the places that are super successful in it. So companies, one of the things I thought was interesting about Hypothesis early on is they literally made a spreadsheet of every digital and
Hmm.
electronic form of highlighting and annotating that had ever come before them,
Hmm.
including looking at examples of handwritten versions of it. And
Yeah.
they're like, okay, what does the form and shape of all this stuff look like?
Hmm.
And then once we've done that research, we can try and implement something that will work now.
Right.
But
Right.
to literally make a list of 50 different companies or things, and some of them came and failed and disappeared.
Right.
But the having done that initial research made it so much easier for them to come
Hmm.
up with something
Yeah.
so
Well,
much
it's
better.
the classic story of, Picasso, learning to draw in the style of all of the masters before, kind of developing his own innovations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, Dan, to back up a bit, how old is your dad?
he's
My
going to be
dad?
90 in March.
Okay. Because I mean, functioning at the level he does is pretty impressive.
Yes. Oh,
I'm just
absolutely. Yeah.
curious.
Yeah. Yeah, both my parents are going to be 90 in February, late
Wow.
February, early March. Yeah.
Well, it's the fact that Dan's always asking him these questions that, keeps him active
That's
and
what kind
young.
of
Like
intrigues
Well, it's
my
it's kind of
my 50-year-old son still doesn't know it all, and I got to
Well, I
be
know.
around here to.
it's funny. I'm going to give him this. His Kindle. He was reading Kindle books on one of those Kindles. The ones that you can watch the Prime movies on as well. And
Yeah.
it kind of crapped out on him several months ago, and so he's been going back to his bookshelves and he's been pulling books off the shelf and rereading, kind of books that he read 25 years ago, and looking at the notes that he made then, and kind of so he's in this conversation with himself, his past self, his 25 years ago, 30 years ago self, and he's been retired for quite a while,
Well, yeah, of course.
but
I'm
he's
also just curious about what
yeah,
that.
but he's really kind of
He's
doing a
he's
lot.
significantly older than me.
Yeah, he's been doing a lot. I mean, he's been doing a lot of kind of catching up. I think because of all of those years when, for the longest time he was a high school teacher, and then he taught all of the kind of the complet survey courses at UC Davis.
Sure.
And so he spent a lot of time, just rereading the things, the passages out of the Iliad or of Shakespeare or whatever it was that he was, talking about that week, and not, going broader and further and stuff. So now he's kind of indulging himself in that. So yeah, it's kind of a great. Yeah, so I'm taking some inspiration from that, and and I was looking the other night. I woke up, in the middle of the night, and my head was buzzing. So I got out I started pulling some of the great books off the shelf, and of this set that my parents, gifted me during the holidays, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And, I pulled out like volume 5, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. And there's 45 plays in here.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, if I did, if I read one of them a week, that's going to take me nearly a year, right? And then I also went to the shelf and I got, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. And this and other things like Gilgamesh are not even in there, right? So I'll have to, sort of expand around the edges and add some stuff. so I just thought, you know,
Given
it's
there's
hard to-
clearly a good index to that, it would be, we're what, 50, 60 years down the road from that for its original publication. Yeah. It would be interesting to pick up with what you think is actually missing.
Yeah.
Given the last 50, 60 years. Because it's, 62 was the publication of Silent Spring.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That had a 60-year rewrite by a British ornithologist that made the book a bit more British European, but still looked over the world from the environmental point of view. And it is semi-autobiographical in the sense that that author's talking about him growing up and his interactions with nature at different ages.
Right. In a world
So that makes it a bit better than this otherwise huge list of great things that were going to be coming out of things like the EPA and environmental protection style stuff. And then it all gets watered down in the actual hard economics, politics of whatever the House and Senate procedures were, or parliamentary procedures in Europe. Right. But then you turn around, and we've got in the last section of the book, we had alternative energy, emancipation, digital commons, for instance, as chapters. 60 plus years ago, other than a level of pure type environmentalism, there wasn't much because the current environmentalism field was significantly kicked off by the likes of Rachel Carson.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, it's interesting that
you've got an index set of books. And no doubt there's subject headings and similar, like you have in Encyclopedia Britannica. So you've almost got a tag system. So what's missing? Given that we've talked about in your example about your father patching up his reading. Now he could go back and look at the marginalia that he put into paper copies. And somebody else also spoke about the level of what, like with Mark said about when you're a student, you're looking for the answer because you're being asked a question. You're not looking to solve that question 20, 30, 40 years down the line because you're not necessarily, as an undergrad particularly, already thinking of, I want to become a tenured professor type question, because outside of that regime, you don't necessarily know that, oh yeah, I'm going to be a history professor, Erasmus, when I'm 65. Plans don't work out quite like that. Every career change I've had has not been explicitly planned. The plan, rather like Eisenhower says, the plan doesn't last the first engagement, but to do it without a plan is utterly stupid.
Right.
So you know what the resources are, you know where things sit, etc.
And
you can then apply that.
The Eisenhower quote is one of the things that my dad had used as an epigram in his handbook that I've sort of continued using. And I was thinking that I would maybe think about that a little bit and kind of riff on that. If the plan doesn't survive the first encounter with the enemy and yet planning is necessary, what is it that planning is actually doing for you that
I'm obviously waiting for my personalized
to be read planned for the rest of my life.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the
I need to get at least halfway down the list before I pop off.
Right, the bucket list. I was thinking about when you said tag systems, I was thinking about kind of the whole, because I had sort of disagreed, when we were reading Scott Shepard, and he had said, well, I'm going to take the Library of Congress or whatever,
And even if you keep reasonably tight within some sort of boundary, as in, if you stick to history, you can do the history of the workings of, say, thermodynamics, and you can put it in the context of what was politically going on, what other industries were going on, where the money came from, what wars did it help or cause.
Right.
But you're not necessarily going to go into the four laws of thermodynamics in any great detail.
Right.
Whereas I probably would.
Right.
So therefore, my tags are going to be slightly more radically different than yours, because I wouldn't particularly care that Wellington was Prime Minister when steam engines started to become relatively common.
Right.
And that was one of the things that he and his party couldn't get over, because all of a sudden they didn't need the bodies.
Yeah.
Quite so much. But one of the things I did hear somewhere, I heard rather than read, but when James Watt was first trying to sell the steam engine, he couldn't do it because the people he was talking to, business people and bean counter types, didn't understand the equivalent of pumping power, until somehow he also designed a thing called the horsepower. So as soon as they had the literal yardstick to say, if I buy this and it's 15 horsepower, I can get rid of 15 horses.
Well, it's interesting because
I can actually get rid of 4 times that, because they work in shifts.
Because you can't work them all 24/7,
etc.
Well,
so
the interesting thing is, one of those things, I mean, the second one, horsepower, is a positive measure, right? Pumping power is a negative capability, right? It's the ability to get the water out of the mine, right? And so it would be valued in a different way, right? It would be understood.
But the first job was to pump the water out.
Right.
Second job was to do the lift up and down.
Right. Well, and it's only valued based on several steps down the line, when you actually get something out of the mine that you can turn into cash, right? So
it's not immediate.
It's an infrastructural kind of a thing.
It's significant amount of time before they started using pressurized oil or compressed air tools to do the digging. They were still doing it with pick and shovel.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting, because I had sort of
the consequences, and then of course from that, the same engine making steam became electric. You got another whole range of tools that can be used. I don't know whether you've seen it. The horse plow went quite quickly in Europe, and they put 2 traction engines, one at each end of the field, and there's a train-driven plow that runs between them.
From one side to the other.
So if you look up traction engine plowing, you need 2 engines.
Wow.
And now, of course, the original acre was defined as a 1-man, 1-horse, 1 plow slice, how much you could plow in a day. So you get all those connections, and the traction engine was doing 10 plus.
Interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that there was a thing, that there was ever a chain drive kind of a thing.
Yeah, you just need the thing is, you just need to be able to make a chain
Yeah.
long enough to go from one end of the field to the other,
That does sound expensive.
because the plough is attached to the chain, and
Right.
the two engines got there's a big flywheel type cog underneath them, and that's what drives the plough.
Mm.
But there's still a ploughman sitting on it and doing a bit of steering,
Yeah.
because it was never going to go straight,
Right.
because you can't get enough tension.
Okay. It does
So
sound like a lot
There's a
of
number
failure points.
there's a number of YouTube showing you this being used,
Wow.
because they're still around.
Wow.
They're all sort of, rural museums with them on.
Interesting.
You guys might have missed it, because
I don't
think it lasted very long, because
yeah.
not long after that, the tractor engine, as opposed to a traction engine,
Mhm.
came out and allowed you to do things not so much in straight lines, etc.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a bit like I've said in some of the books we've cross-read, and then outside reading, the joining up, where the whole thing with the tagging and stroke and hashtags, and you put the file in one place. How do you make sure you can always find it
Mm-hmm.
when you've got a question or an answer you find, and you want to make sure it gets attached to the right place,
Mm-hmm.
such that you can always find it again? Because that's the problem with all these people writing on Reddit, which obviously exercise him a little bit more than the West Wing even.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny, because I think there is, like I said, I had sort of objected to Scott Shepard when he said that thing about the Library of Congress, but then I had sort of flirted with it again when I was like taking the whole Syntopicon and putting it into Obsidian and linking the things together, and showing that. But I haven't, and that still exists in my vault.
But those things are almost always singular label.
Well, the thing is, I haven't connected,
because they're trying to make a location
to it, right? I haven't, there are a couple of topical tags that I do use myself, so there are a couple of pieces of the big blob that's the Syntopicon in my graph that connect to other things, but for the most part, not as much, and not in the same way, and especially not using a lot of the terminology that that Adler used, when he put together the Syntopicon, angels and yada yada. But it does strike me also that, based on what you were saying, Tim, that the thing about, I was originally sort of an environmental historian. That was kind of my first PhD level field. First I did Latin American history in my master's program, but then environmental. And I did kind of global environmental history. And one of the things that really struck me about European environmental history is that it was very Green Party, and the people who wrote European environmental history, people like Joachim Radkau in Germany, were Green Party members, and so they had this sort of theoretical, historical understanding, but they also had kind of this practical, I'm down on the street, protesting this or lobbying for this or advocating for this type of experience with it, which which was probably a little bit different from the Americans who got into it, who were more, probably stayed in their faculty offices and stuff a little bit more than the Europeans did. And I wonder if that kind of change, it gave it sort of a different flavor, because I was looking at this, I was thinking about this alternative energy section, and then especially the Digital Commons thing.
Well, in that case, of course, Labour was much more European in that context, because he was out on the streets a lot for various bits and pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, the Digital Commons thing too. I mean, it struck me as I've probably told the story before of, when I went to my first Open Education Week global conference in Milan, it was very Euro. It was very, and it was very, and the people who were, who had organized it and who were hosting it and running it and stuff at the Polytechnic in Milan were really kind of tightly their Venn diagrams overlapped substantially with the UN and the UNESCO sustainability goals, and and kind of all of that stuff,
Hmm.
in a way that again in America wasn't quite as NGO adjacent.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious, about, when they're talking about the digital commons and when they're talking about the alternative energy stuff in the end of this, does it strike you as being, kind of that, again, that sort of, I don't know if I want to say captured, but but part of a kind of a larger um, institutional movement?
Yeah, when I was reading through the digital commons and then looking at the reading list at the back, that's like two and a half of my shelves
Mm-hmm.
are focused on that. And it's just
Right.
okay, I have this, I know where this comes from. I'm like, I'm mentioned in these two books that that are mentioned in this.
A lot of
And I'm
Lawrence
just like,
Sussman.
it was really, I'm like, okay, I wasn't expecting to have that sort of pop up. And I thought that the digital commons and mobility I thought were quite good. And the mobility tied back to, I can't remember what it was. It was in the second or third section where they were looking at Nigeria and just sort of alternate economic systems that were just sort of off the map,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, sort
Mm-hmm.
of the informal economies. That's the one. And it was just because the mobility, having the digital commons, the mobility, and the informal economies seemed to be an awful lot of what was happening sort of mid 2000s up through around 2015 or so, or
Mm-hmm.
pretty much up until pandemic, where if you were, in a technical role and you could be a digital nomad, live wherever, move wherever,
Mm-hmm.
um, like early 2010s, mid 2010s, a lot of that freedom and ease of being able to work anywhere um, was getting sort of ratcheted down a bit by various countries, and it's just like, oh, you're coming here, we were happy to have you, now we're adding more taxes. It's, you've got to pay your home country tax, you've got to pay our tax, you've got to follow these regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And there was sort of, it got to started getting to be where there was like polar opposites, where I think it was like Estonia, you could have like the e visa,
Mm-hmm.
where you could essentially have e-citizenship with them, and that gave you rights to roam and work anywhere. And then there was other countries that were just like, nope, you've got to,
Mm-hmm.
if you're coming here and you're working,
Yep.
we're going to restrict you.
Right.
Well,
And so
you can
that was,
analogize our discussion of the, James Watt's,
hmm,
engine, and how do you pitch that and what does it open up in the future? So having the ability for people to move around and more easily create connections and links and run into things in their environment that's going to increase the value of serendipity and creativity could be huge a century down the line. And so that idea of digital nomadism could be,
mhm,
the thing that creates Watt's,
mhm,
industrial revolution to some extent. Although at the same time, you've got the fact that it's all digital and online and communication has accelerated, certainly helps. But
yep,
the actual, for this book at least, in the human part of it, it's the human connection, the human interaction that, from an economic standpoint, and the people who are making the argument, should you be able to be remote or should you be in the office? And yes, there
mhm,
are benefits to being in an office and actually physically interacting with people every day
Mm-hmm.
that kind of accelerates the space. So you can do
yep,
that. And that similar thing applied to the alternative energy piece. The one thing, and it kind of came and went, and I don't think a lot of people paid a whole lot of attention to it, but in Trump's energy policy, he hamstrung a lot of the alternative energy stuff because he's so against the environmentalism piece. But the issue is there's no end to us needing and wanting more power. So you need all the options you can possibly get to feed
Mhm.
that, the unending growth that we've got because, donut economics is certainly not a thing.
Right.
But so he hamstrings a lot of this alternative energy stuff just at a point when we know 20 years from now we're going to need massive growth in energy production.
Mhm.
And a lot of that hamstringing of energy production that he did in the big beautiful bill that got passed is a political issue of the now versus
Yeah.
he is not looking for what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now, and
Right.
China is going to eat our lunch because we're not going to have the energy growth we need 20 years from now,
Right.
because this law has just wiped it off the table.
Well, and also, I mean, and the whole thing is absurd, right? Because anything that he does now, with respect to deregulating, maybe licensing of nuclear plants, right, is certainly going to be undone by the next adversarial
Yeah.
administration that comes in from the other side, right? And so, and in any case, I mean, we can't. I mean, it's 5 years to get a gas turbine that we order today, right? So,
Yeah.
so putting up solar and wind is actually like the fastest thing. One of the things that struck me though was this about this digital nomadism
Mhm.
thing is I wonder if there's a class element involved in this though, because
Mhm.
digital nomadism is great for the people who have, private jets. And that and it's and probably a lot of people want to preserve it for them. But if it goes, but if it becomes universal, I'm sorry, what, Tim?
You don't need a private jet. You just need a decent airline with Wi-Fi and a
Okay,
hotel at each end.
right, all right. Well, what I'm saying is that once it devolves to that, Tim, what you're saying, then how much of it is just outsourcing knowledge work, right? And and how much of that do these economies want to allow? I'm reminded of it. There's a line in Chrystia Freeland's book Plutocrats that talks about that people are that the elites are not really, they don't really belong to a nation anymore, and they've started to see the world not as not as a set of nation states, but as rich places and poor places. They want to go to they want to bop around to the rich places, and they want to avoid the poor places.
Well, the thing that I thought of in that context is if you look at maybe a quarter of, say, Tim Ferriss's guests, they're often talking not so much about them bopping around, but their immediate support staff bopping around or being somewhere cheap in the first place.
Mm.
And that digital link, not quite nomadism, but there was, I forget what his name, Sam something, but not Sam Harris, because he doesn't bop around that much. There was one of the IT guys that does IT for medical stuff, or medical stuff with IT. He seemed to impress Tim by turning up with his backpack, which is his normal backpack, that goes everywhere. And he's got like 3 T-shirts, 2 pairs of pants, 6 pairs of socks, and a second pair of shoes, and a set of cables.
Mm-hmm.
And he, because he's rather a bit like my old CEO, moving around the different projects, he has something like 6 or 8 Filipinos running his diary, such that there's always one of them is up. So that he doesn't have to know which one of them's up. Almost all of his instructions to the group done via a Loom type video saying, do this, do it like this, so I can unpick it if I need to later. And it turns out that they also bug all of their hardware so they see how long it takes them. So that he can then decide who to promote and who to demote and who to pay well and all the stuff. By the amount of communications that come through, basically. But there's a bunch of them that are either going to physical places for either explicitly work reasons or because, oh, I want to try and live for $200 a month this month, food and hotel wise. So they're popped off to Colombia or Bali or somewhere in Uganda or something.
Or the Philippines.
And
Yeah.
because they certainly won't come here for that.
Right.
But it makes no difference other than the time zone. And you can live outside the time zone you're physically in if you had to. Because it's so what? You don't need the daylight in the same context as you did when you want to go ploughing a field. Don't want the wolves coming hunting at night.
Right.
You want the daylight so you can see them coming. Type thing. But I don't think it's just this book, but it's not all of the books. Many of the books that we've read still take me back to like the second one we read, plus Steve Dotto's book. Not so much the card paper as Zettelkasten. You really have to trust that your index stroke tagging stroke search function to be trusted. And the only way really to do that is to use it and do it. Don't sit there trying to plan or design the process. Let that process evolve. And that's one of the things that's often talked about with whether you set up folders or not, and if so, which folders in things like Obsidian. Quite a few people say, don't bother at all. Other people say, put your daily notes in a place, put your templates in a place, put your book club stuff in a place, and put your own book notes in somewhere else. At least you can then narrow down the search a bit occasionally to make it more efficient, more effective. And maybe you then, maybe instead of, if I put your name into my Obsidian, it comes up so many times. Poor Chris gets embarrassed because he only comes up a few times because of Buffo, whatever it is, page doesn't get saved that very often. Typewriters are not my thing. Sorry to say, but but it does mean
it also makes it easier to publish stuff out.
I've had to design about a dozen search routines that the word I'm searching for goes in as a variable, but the zone to which I search, it gets confined because if it's like this, reading this book comes up on today's daily note because of a Zoom. But it might come up 3 times this week, none of which make sensible stuff I want to search, but only because I want a record of what books I read when. But that doesn't mean that searching inside this book is being helped. But it does mean that I know what I was reading, which is a different question. And I'm sure I'm sure when I get to your dad's position and start going back, then a good number of those tags will either be added to or edited out, as I find that they are either not that useful or no longer valid. And what I can delete, because at that point, whether I read this chapter last week or this week, makes no real difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So it's always a live set of notes, and it's always going to change.
Yeah.
And but so many people approach it from, I'm going to do this, it's cast in concrete, and I'm just going to keep going. And that, I think, is particularly digital form, is wrong, because you know that if you did it by a settled cast and a loom, and you go look at those cards, they get altered a lot, because every time he uses them, he either extends them or say, no, this card now needs to be 2 cards, etc.
Well, it's curious too that, you know, you'd see Dan's name pop up too many times. You also then need to add a second or third tag that you search for to kind of narrow down all the noise.
Mhm.
You know, David Graeber using the tag anthropology would be useless to him because
Right.
everything he's got is related to anthropology. But what's weird too is seeing how people use these systems over time and how specific they become.
Yeah.
A name other than pointing you to maybe the Wikipedia page of that name, which, you know, we've got to encourage Dan to get his own Wikipedia page, because Graeber's got one.
I don't have one. I don't want one.
And as you say, big subjects like anthropology will get you nowhere. It's almost as though you're going to end up with a tag that is, here is everything from dawn, and everything subject out of that Handy Rock gets the everything dawn tag, because that's where it started from. Because as you've said in the past,
you could as easily have
your own
put in the
memory
tag
fills
of
in
indigenous
stuff for you.
critique, though.
You know Candy, but almost anything with just one tag is also probably useless, because you can only approach it from one direction.
Yes, I agree. Well, I used a tag of indigenous critique, but then I also used a tag of Candy Rock, which helps me because there were some Jesuit relations, even in Dawn of Everything, right? There were some Jesuit relations oriented indigenous critiques that did not involve Candy Rock. So yeah, I think
But ultimately, because there was so much effort put into doing, reading, talking about Dawn of Everything, Candy Rock's got to have a Dawn of Everything tag. And as you say, the other thing that came up is the 3 or 4 Jesuits that have maybe named in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not them individually, but Jesuits maybe. You know? But if you're doing your English and early American radicals, you'll probably find a lot of anti-Jesuit stuff.
Right.
So do you tag that? Do you tag that with Jesuit, or do you tag that with anti-Jesuit? No, because
yeah, or anti.
So is it Antifa or is it Anti-Antifa?
Anti-Masonic. I got a lot of anti-Masonic stuff.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
Since Dan,
but also, oddly enough, partly because something else that picked up from a point on this week, but earlier on, which was a bit more land ownership type stuff, I ended up by having to pick up the history from the Second English Civil War, which is mostly when England versus Ireland,
The second.
and the takeover of the plantation land and the importation of the Scots into Ireland, just add to that. And then, as soon as that tag came through, it's like, who are the famous English people who lived in Ireland?
Hmm.
Of course, she then pops out, amongst others, is Wellington.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, and look,
But you're still
and as
still have
things
a question
pop up,
of kind of the quality.
you could still find that you may not revise all of the tags with landing closure, but you might, having found this thing on landing closure that comes up, you might then add a couple more
Mhm.
because it might then relate to what appears to be conservation from an ecological point of view isn't really, because you're limiting the species in the hedge
Mhm.
because you plant it in one go. So you plant it with a limited range of plants. Because at the moment, of course, in the UK particularly, the standard methodology to date a hedge is you walk several 100-meter stretches, counting the species per 100 meters.
Oh, really?
And that's the number of hundreds years back.
Huh.
So you do that three or four samples down a hedge just to make sure you've got 3 or 4 numbers to take an average from.
Interesting.
But if you've got a brand new hedge done by an ecological group, they'll put 20 plus species in it now.
Mm.
So now they're screwing up the science.
They've end run the system. Yeah.
Just
Well, and
nice.
there is that question of sort of the quality, you know, of the link, right? So there would be some things I think that would sort of be obvious to me that I would want to connect because I would be able to use them to give, you know, a compelling example, you know, in a narrative or in an analysis of, for example, the indigenous critique, right? You know, so so I guess my focus would be less on getting them all as it would be on, you know, getting the really good ones. And I don't think that is that as mysterious and as difficult. I think getting them all is a much more, you know, daunting and ultimately a task for which probably the, you know, it's not worth the candle in the long run, right? It's just, you know, there's a diminishing return associated with that, which I think is what Chris has said in the chat.
Well, some people too sit down and they're like, I have to write down every thought I have and I have to interlink them all.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that there is value in the editing down of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've noticed too over the last, 6 months or a year, and it's become even more in the last few weeks. So since you pulled out your book from the 40s, I got, Principles of Indexing and Filing from 1932.
Nice.
And its follow-up edition, which has a very, specific sexual reference
Yep.
or gender reference later in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And then Progressive Indexing and Filing. This is
Wow.
a fifth edition. No authors listed, but it was kind of written and published by Remington Rand.
Wow.
Who, and then
Wisdom for the Ages doesn't need an author.
Progressive Records Filing Progressive Filing and Records Management, that are all about how do you index things
Mm-hmm.
and how do you file them. The earliest one, and I don't have an OG copy yet, are the 2 books by Julius Kaiser from 1908 and 1911. But the one thing that's interesting about reading across that is Kaiser's method is way more mushy and fungible
Mm,
because he's a librarian. He's talking about how do you index things from not just a librarian's perspective, but how do you then apply that to business?
hmm
And so he's much more generic, whereas all of these are written as physical textbooks that as a high school or a college student or a secretarial college student, how do you do the actual thing? So they become way more specific to how do you index things for, the word Rolodex doesn't exist in any of these books, I don't think. But how do you index all the people
Hmm.
and the companies they work for? Or how do you index their names or business names?
hmm
Or how do you index by subject? And the subjects are always the industrial goods you or your company may be making or the things you need to make the thing you're manufacturing.
hmm
And how do you index all that stuff and keep it so that you can build a searchable database so that when management needs
Right.
to ask a question, they can pull a whole bunch of records and come up with some kind of answer.
Right. Keep the suppliers separate from the customers. Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how it goes from very vague in the early 1900s to super specific. And I think probably my favorite one is the Remington Rand one because they wrote it over the span of, I think they started in the 20s, and this fifth edition is 1951. But they look at, and what's really fascinating, every company that manufactured a cabinet or filing cabinets had kind of their own
Their
system.
system. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's, the Yeoman and Irby method, there's the Remington Rand methods. Some of the companies that manufactured card dividers or index cards had their methods
hmm
for how do you do these things. And they describe and delineate all of them, and it's just slightly different methods of, do you do it it's almost all alphabetical, but how do you lay out the cards within the system?
Right.
And none of it's as heavy as what Luhmann was doing.
Right. Well, I'm going to suggest that there's a class element in there too, in the same way that there is in going from the digital nomadism for the elite to the outsourcing knowledge work thing. Isn't there kind of an institutional capture element to this, that what we don't want to have is we don't want to have Girl Friday having, such specific personal expertise that she is irreplaceable, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
We want to take that intelligence and put it in the system so that the value is in the system rather than in the person who's able to do that thing.
Well, there
Mhm.
there is a suggestion too in a couple of these that, and it's some of it I think is built into how we think about rising up within the American system and the American economy. You start as a janitor in a company and you work your way up to CEO.
The mailroom.
Well,
Yeah.
they suggest in here that it's the value of the knowledge and knowing where to find it and how to get it and accumulate it and put it together. That if you start out as a file clerk within a company, you know the company better than most of the others because you know all the pieces of where the company's moving parts are, and you've got the information at your fingertips, and you know how to go find it when you need it. So when you have a question, you don't ask the question, in the old days, you would, as an executive, you would say to your file clerk, give me all the files on these three topics where they intersect.
hmm
And somebody from the mailroom brings up all those files to you in a folder so you can look through them, come up with the answer to your question, and then you send them back and they get refiled.
Right.
So we're doing that same thing now. The difference is you're querying a computer database, but then you've got to do a whole lot more filtering for what are the exact things that I need
Right.
to answer that question. And or was it but in the past, because it was so manual and labor intensive, asking the right question from the get-go and refining that before you sent it down and
Mhm.
made the filing clerks in the mailroom do all that work
Right.
was way more important. Whereas now you can just you throw it at three AI models and you see what comes back.
Right. Well, there's also there's still a I think there's still that same dynamic applying, right? So you've taken this situation where this Girl Friday, to use the gender terminology, right? Had all of this, what the institution would like to be institutional knowledge, right? So they take it and they institutionalize it with these systems, right? But then they also the aggressive young guy who wants to rise up through the ranks from the mailroom to the C-suite says, well, okay, if I can become the knowledge specialist, right, if I can leverage these systems to so that I won't need, because I'm such an expert with the systems, I won't need that person to support me anymore, then yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like an arms race, isn't it? It kind of.
Well, so, you've noticed too, some of it there are, and I have some specific knowledge within the entertainment space. Every talent agency had built a database of based on all the scripts and all the actors in town and who's written and directed and done whatever, produced whatever.
Wow.
They created these internal databases to have that institutional knowledge
Hmm.
inside the agency. But it's so heavily duplicated at the 50 agencies in town
Sure.
that companies, pop up and externalize that. So now you have the IMDb that has all of that data,
Right.
and it's not just available for the agencies, although you'll notice some of it is very specific to the business side, and they charge a fee for agencies and production companies to have access to that stuff, that
Hmm.
it's out there, but they know they can charge hundreds of dollars to agencies and production companies for the value of that versus all the rest of the data is there for the general public. So that database has been outsourced from a small company where it was institutional knowledge to now
Hmm.
it's a bigger product for a broader, wider world. So the
Hmm.
databases become bigger and bigger and then leave the place where they were the institutional knowledge to become general, broad knowledge potentially for places that's useful. Um, So it's the project leaves the company and it goes from even the Girl Friday to broad public. And then the
Hmm.
question is, how good are you at knowing these things exist? So even though Tim is not a fan of typewriters, it's not cultural knowledge that there is a typewriter database. And if you want to know, oh, what's this typewriter I just got today, there's a place you can go search and not only probably find the exact thing you've got, but thousands of other models exactly like it to the point that you can track changes in manufacturing
Hmm.
over 5, 10, 20, 30 year spans and say, okay, here's the original patent. Here's where company A uses it for 10, 20 years.
Right.
Now it's out of patent and every company on the planet is using this.
Hmm.
Or these companies license this feature so it shows up in
Hmm.
machines,
Right.
but that kind of institutional knowledge is kind of hidden away, and you really have to know how to look or know even to look to think that, hey, it would be there.
Hmm.
And the average Joe, yeah, you watch the typewriter Reddit, and the average Joe does not know there's a database out there for telling him exactly what machine he has. And
Right.
oh, by the way, here's the manual for it, and here's the original. In a lot of cases, you could quickly find the company's internal repair manual
Hmm.
to fix the thing
Wow.
is even out there because somebody scanned it and uploaded it, or it's scanned and uploaded and you can buy it for $5
Hmm.
instead of having to need to know somebody who's in their 90s who has it in their filing cabinet back home.
Right.
Um,
Right. Well,
so that, you know,
yeah, it's
how
interesting
do you,
because there's an element of sort of the kind of the well, and the web certainly makes that so much more possible. But I was thinking not so much in the typewriter, but as in the kind of the entertainment industry database example. There's a kind of a genericization of kind of anecdotal knowledge to some type of score based knowledge. And the thing that in my experience that I had run up against when I was doing my research for my dissertation was I went into the Baker Library at Harvard and looked at the R.G. Dunn and Company's credit reports that, going all the way back to
Hmm.
the early 19th century to I think some of the earliest ones were like 18 for the people that I was looking at were like 1820s, maybe even 18 teens. And they were very and it was the craziest thing. You weren't allowed to photograph it for some reason. They wanted to keep it. They wanted to keep a close control over images of these things never getting out. But they were in these big ass ledger books, and but not multi-column, just big pages of kind of handwritten in pen in all different colors of all different colors of ink, or different grades of blue ink or whatever. Over time, just these long kind of run-on sentences about so there would be person A or company A, Henry Ranney of Ashfield, and then it would and then every time an affiliate or an investigator for R.G. Dunn, or somebody who was trusted enough that they would record his comments, would go through the town, he would make a little note, honest guy, seems good for his obligations, that sort of thing, and there would just be these line after line after line, with date and sometimes the initials or the name of the reporter, and then just these kind of anecdotal observations, and this was what they used to create credit profiles. And then in the middle of the 19th century, when companies like R.G. Dunn, and the Tappan Agency, which Lewis, I think his name was Lewis Tappan, was they were a ministerial family, the Tappans, and they were part of the Second Great Awakening. And this was kind of how the Second Great Awakening became about social control in a big way, right? This idea that somehow being worthy of credit had something to do with being good, right? And virtuous, and kind of culturally valuable. And so all of these things kind of get kind of jammed together and mixed together. But out of it, in the long run, come numerical credit scores. So it's a weird evolution.
yeah, I was always struck by the book Devil in the White City,
Mm-hmm.
the story in the World's Fair in Chicago.
Yep.
And it's essentially the story of a guy who can come in from the outside, and because there's no credit scoring and no one knows anything, and you take flyers on somebody's kind of credit worthiness, that he's able to like build this dungeon in his house to kidnap and kill people.
Yeah.
And none of the workers got paid, and they're all different, and they've moved on everywhere, so nobody knows how the house got built and what it was built for or why.
Mm-hmm.
Separately, all the people, a lot of contractors now know better because it's been so widely advertised that Donald Trump is not going to pay you. So,
Yep.
so get your money up front if you're,
Mhm.
a contractor working on his properties,
Right.
because he is not just building in New York. Or if he builds in New York, he can go through so many contractors
Mhm.
to get a building done, and then he's building in 20 other cities, and he almost has to build in the other cities because no one in New York will trust him anymore.
Right.
to actually pay him the full price of the thing, or he'll complain about it after the fact and try not to pay you. So ultimately, the way most contractors operate, you get some kind of small deposit up front, and you get enough money to cover the materials and most of the labor
Hmm.
at the halfway point, but all your profit is
On the back end,
backloaded to the
right?
tail end.
Yep.
And that's the part you're never going to get paid for by Trump, is the profit for keeping
Hmm.
you around.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
but you can skate that system apparently for so many decades that, no there, but there's no database. And for me, this is one of the things that is super interesting is corporations keep massive database files on us as individuals now, which is what drives the modern digital economy. But we don't have that reverse database such that, you know, I can go query, insurance companies have huge amounts of data on all of us, but
Hmm.
I don't, as an individual, I would love to know what does that database say about me specifically so that I can make healthcare calls and questions.
Right.
What is my specific, and doctors generally don't have that database either.
Hmm.
They have some broad thumbprint things that they can look at
Right.
to say, yeah, you're 50, so we got to worry about prostate cancer and these three other, your heart health is going to be a big
There's
factor.
things on the checklist.
Your
Yeah.
cancer, but they know it in broad, but they don't know it in the fine. Hey, you're a cisgender white guy with
With
this
this
genetic
with this
makeup.
Amazon purchase history, so
Yeah.
so we can make
And
some
we know
inferences
the
about it.
we know the cities you've lived in, and oh, by the way, you were in Baltimore for 4 years where the chromium 6,
Hmm.
exposure is larger than average, so we should worry about
Right.
these types of cancers as a result of
Yeah.
having been in that place or location. But we don't individually have access to those kind of databases, which is, I think, one of the things government could, and should be doing better for
Hmm.
tracking what places know what about whom, so that you as an individual can make your own better choices, or even
Socialize the siren servers.
or as a corporation, like, hey, I
No.
have access to those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was, I mean, that whole process of kind of making things big in history, right? When, for example, we went from having farmers, take their wheat harvest, in sacks, to the local miller who would grind it for them and produce flour that oftentimes they would sell, right? There were all kinds of data points along the way, right, about the quality of that individual farmer. Mark might be a better farmer than Tim. Mark might be careful to leave his wheat out in the field long enough to dry so that it's less likely to mold, right? Mark might take his grain to a better miller, who got a better quality of flour out of it. Other even less, less quality related, less product related things, used to be knowable about people, right? Mark, paid his bills, Tim didn't. All of those types of things when you had some type of local relationship, but the whole process of getting big, right? Then once you began taking your wheat or your corn to the local elevator, and you might still take it in a horse-drawn wagon with your name, your farm's name or your initials or something stamped on the outside of your bags. But once it gets dumped into the bulk bin, then
Yeah.
then where is all of that information? It all just disappears, right? And it all just becomes kind of a generic commodity. right?
You can't track it the same way you could track exactly where your bag of coffee beans came from,
Right,
you
right.
know, now,
Your
which is,
your fair
and
trade
the
coffee.
amount of institutional knowledge to track that from farm to table
Hmm.
is insanely huge.
Yeah,
But it has to be in an area where people care about or think that that
that adds
knowledge
value. Yeah,
transfer.
that
So
that
you
add,
see,
that adds commercial value.
yeah,
Yeah.
you see that in coffee to some extent. You definitely see it in champagnes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you could almost say, hey, you know it down to the year or even spans of months that,
Right.
your wine would have been done, and
Right.
that adds value.
Right.
And why
Yeah.
isn't,
And you know the terroir and yeah, all of that.
what's the
Of the chocolate,
terroir?
the terroir of the chocolate, the cacao,
Well, and
right?
I can only do it because I've now seen you on this will be your third iteration of your dad's book, and then your dad and your book as a second edition. And now we're coming to the third edition. So I'll know the terroir of,
Yes.
Dan's
Right.
philosophy on how to read
My
and
right.
write.
My evolution change over time. It's all about I mean, it's all change over time.
But the question then also becomes, what are the things that you excise or that you leave out from those things? So,
Hmm.
one of these earliest books,
Yeah.
this book, it's fairly thin, but it's mostly, the half of the book is a set of rules about how do you properly alphabetize things.
Hmm.
So that if you have a surname of Vanderwall that's in 2 words,
Right.
is it indexed under Vander or is it indexed under Wall?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what those so
Right.
alphabetical order is like rule number 1 and 2, but then there are a bunch of like small variations for the tinier things, and that's the majority of the book versus this other book, which
Hmm.
which has this has 13 chapters on that indexing process. This has one chapter that kind of does a quick summary without as much practice of the
Hmm.
same thing.
Yep.
So you concatenate and you narrow it down, and there may be things you leave out about how, there are quirky things that I'm starting to realize that have been left out of or we don't think about actively as users.
Mm.
And you're making your own index, it's a lot easier to find things within the system. But when you don't know how Google is actively indexing things and how to best search Google to find the things you need for the index you could never build yourself,
Hmm.
how do so you search Dan Alasso on the internet and you get 500 pages of results, and you get that same problem of, I need to know this area about Dan,
Hmm.
and it's probably hidden in a video somewhere, and you're never going to find, you
Right.
know, surely we have talked about your kids and your kids' names and when they were born, and Google is not going to be good enough to have indexed all the videos that if I want that answer, I'll be able to find it quickly without
But
watch,
Will Grok be able to get that?
you know,
Or Grok
maybe,
5
maybe
or Grok
not.
6 or something.
Um,
But then the thing, I mean, it still begs the question of value of of how much, and going back to to what we were talking about earlier about how many of these things actually do need to be captured. These notes about the indigenous critique. Do I need all of them, or do I need the ones that that are that are useful in some way? And so that value, and obviously, too often we kind of default to commercial values. It, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there should be no way of evaluating,
yeah.
how much work should I do on getting all of this, do I, and especially, I mean, nowadays when we actually do have full text search capabilities in most, you know, digital, in most of the digital world, but we still need kind of
Yeah.
context, and we still need sort of multivariable, kind of ways
Or or you need the human values.
or
Or in some of these books, there are things that I search for that are phrases we use now that were not used in the teens or the 20s or 30s or 50s.
Yeah.
So you have to, if they have an index, you spend a few minutes in the index looking at what words were used so that you then find, because you go looking for, this book is great value if you're looking for something on Zettelkastanish or adjacent, but you're not ever in a million years going to find the word Zettelkasten in this book. Or if you search for that word online, you're never going to find this book as a result, because it had not only a different name, but such a generically blown up name. Like, it's like Kleenex.
Right.
It doesn't specify the one company that makes the one thing, but it subsumes a whole category of a bunch of
nor the off-label use that somebody might put it to, right? Which actually only just argues for the value of human researchers.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that won't be very easily and rapidly disintermediated by
too many damn folksonomies,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And damn the person who came up with that word anyway.
Folksonomy?
Who did that?
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah.
And for those that don't laugh, I think the coiner of the word is on the call with us.
Yeah.
Smiling like a Cheshire cat.
Yep. Yep. So we've done it.
Yeah, we didn't discuss the tail end probably as in depth as we could have. But
okay, do you want to?
I think it was worth having read. Certainly, more people probably should read it and be thinking about, and I think the value at the end of the day was the title and kind of centering,
contextualizing all of it. Yeah.
And going forward as the Industrial Revolution and the computer and information revolution happen, I think we tend to forget the individual and the human in everything we do. We just totally ignore all the labor and the work of the individuals that go into making these things. I mean, you can look at this book and read it and then totally forget about, the thousands of people hours that went into manufacturing it and putting it together. And because we've read more David Graeber, we know David Graeber's name better than the other names like Hart who put it together. But that's a piece of the human economy that goes in here, is the appreciation of the individual human work that happens, or even the human work that it takes to get the 5 or 6 or 10 of us to show up to these things every week.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was,
which reminds me, and I need to make the pitch, is because it's November when we started this thing. It's been 3 years now, roughly, that we've been doing this. Should we just write you a personal check to your home address, Dan, or coffee.com, or where's the thing that takes the least amount of cut out of your end for us to send you the $5 or the $10 or the $50 to cover the cost of Zoom? And
thank you, I appreciate it. Actually, I am still paying for the Zoom. The Zoom is an annual thing that I have to cough up. So yeah. So any help with that would be.
But where do we send it?
The coffee thing is probably a good way to make that work.
Enter a link in the message board.
I will. Thank you.
It's like Leo McGarry always said, or I think CJ Craig said it a couple times. How much money and where do we send it?
Coffee. Where is my God? I had a. It's kind of weird. I've been updating all of my
Or because we want to, enrich the almighty Amazon.com, where's your wish list of holiday items?
Oh wow.
Of course, that's because we all know we can't trust lesbian basketball players, right?
What was that?
Yeah, I heard a word salad
I did not really
and
understand.
I'm like curious what that was a reference to because I didn't even catch it.
Let me see. Okay, let's see if this worked. I'm trying to log into it so that I can provide a link. It shows you how infrequently I actually use this thing.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is to make sure that if you give it to us, you check it often enough to take the
Yes,
the $20 out,
right. I will.
or the
do that.
Venmo, or the
Right. Yep.
or your bank routing number. It's all.
Yeah. So yeah, it's lesbian bat. Oh, which lesbian basketball player?
There was an episode where CJ had become chief of staff,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
and she was like an all Ohio great basketball player, and somebody politically questioned her sexuality to
Oh.
minimize her, I think was the thing. Season 6,
Yeah.
if I remember.
Oh my God, there's too much in that. There's just too much. It's the gift that keeps giving. All right. So yeah,
There's 7 seasons.
Yeah. So
and
next
22 episodes a season.
Yeah, American.
So if you've only seen 3, you're not a fan.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So next week we're
the other
on
way
AI, right?
The other way of counting it is how many watched it until 25 people die, and see how far that gets you.
Is that
It's actually appeared in the program as opposed to
okay? Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
in all the assassinations and bombings and killings they do remotely.
Wow. That's.
Oh, so yeah, how far are we going next week?
I haven't really looked at it.
It reads pretty easily.
Okay. How far should we go then?
I mean, it's not like reading this thing.
Well, is it? I mean, is there a kind of a thematic?
Yeah,
change
of course,
point.
I don't actually have a book I can quickly look in.
Okay,
Yeah,
Thomas, you got it.
Yeah.
And if it reads quickly, should we do it in 2 weeks or 3 instead of?
I think
There's-
it's
It's broken into sections.
Hey,
There's 4
clearly-
sections.
to get it ready for the holidays.
So
Okay,
first
you wanna
section
do-
runs from page 23. How many pages? It looks like it's just under 100
Next holiday
pages.
here is on the 2nd of December. So we will finish it before then.
I think for at least, well, I don't know.
4 weeks. All right.
All I can say is it reads very quickly.
Okay.
Well, and depending on its depth of and density, should we read two sections and split it into 2 weeks, or
We could do that. I will be in
Mhm.
California next week, but I can do it from California. I can meet from California, and the following week I will be back here. So yeah,
are they still down in the Irvine area, or are they?
They're in Woodland, which is sort of between Davis and Sacramento.
Okay, I was going to say if you're in the neighborhood, come over for coffee, but.
I will, did the Huntington Library survive?
Ooh.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's literally I evacuated to a house that was like 10 blocks from the Huntington.
All right.
Hmm.
Because I will be
it's still there.
I will need to come out and see that. And I was thinking actually kind of calling you up and saying, hey, let's get a cup of coffee or eat a meal or something when I did that.
We have, and depending on how you arrange it, but we have family membership, and I'm pretty sure we probably still have guest passes.
Oh wow, cool.
So we can go do coffee at the Huntington.
Wow, that would be kind of cool. Yeah.
Or if you really want to go high end, they have a tea room, and they lay on a tea that's like $100 a person if you really want to
Wow.
the full experience. And I don't have the in the fires, I lost my Victorian era like suit, and
morning
cane
suit.
and
Yeah.
monocle,
Yeah. All
So
right.
I can't do
So
that.
Rich does a pretty
I would
good
say
black tea.
don't pack yours unless you really want to do that.
Okay.
But,
Okay. I'll probably not. That's funny. I used to work with a guy up in Bemidji who was a younger guy. He was in his like late 30s, early 40s, and he traveled all the time. And one time he was coming back from a winter break or a spring break or something, and his luggage had been lost on the way back from Vienna, and he was really mad about it because he had gone to the opera, and so he had lost his tux in the luggage, and he was really mad. He insisted on getting compensated for that. But yeah, this young guy just went to would go to the opera in Vienna and wear his formals.
although I will say too, they're doing construction and renovation on the library. So and they have a great early American history thing, as I'm sure you know. But if you're planning on library, call ahead to have them pull what you think you might need or might want.
Well, yeah,
The library construction thing is throwing everybody off.
Okay, yeah, this is still in my future, so I would be
So the
going,
book is
probably for the
divided
Thomas
into
Paine stuff.
four parts.
Okay, so shall we do 2 for next week?
It's about 220 pages.
220 pages. Do you want to do that much in a week? I mean, even if
It's
it's
easy reading, but there's a lot in
even
there.
if it's easy reading, I mean, if there's a lot to talk about, we can have an easy read and then still talk about
There's a lot of here's what I would describe it as. There's several themes, right?
I've had plenty of pictures that make
there's
reading easy.
A lot of names
No
and
pictures.
dates and sequences of events.
Okay.
But like there's one theme would be
I thought we might be dipping into sort of, this is the stuff we write for MAGA type crime. Yeah.
Well, why don't let's do one section then and see how.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Good enough.
Okay. Well, I've got to move.
All right.
I'll
Ciao.
see you as and when.
Yep. Have a good week. All right. And I've got my card. You know what I do? I have all these cards now that are on my desk and in little piles on my desk and stuff. And I don't have a card file down here. So I'm going to have to adjust that sometime soon before I start losing things. So anyways, have a good week. And
I'm going to say, are you doing 3x5 cards still there?
I am.
There's a Black Friday sale on the small, cheap cardboard boxes at Amazon. Or like 20 or 30% off.
Well, those ones that snap together?
Well, not the snap together. It's the cardboard, whatever the company is that's now Globewise that makes the cardboard.
Okay.
The black speckled, like composition notebook looking.
Oh yeah, sure.
Boxes. I think they're like 15 or 16 bucks this week instead of 25 or 30.
Oh, cool. I'll look at that. Thank you.
Which is crazy because I spent less than that on each of the wooden boxes behind me. So
Yep. The right place at the right time. That's what it's all about.
Just patience and watching.
Yep.
So
okay. Have a good week.
Ciao.